This video will slay you. Have you ever stopped to think about exactly how Santa gets up on the housetop of 800 million households in one night? This is an incredible feat that he and his reindeer have to accomplish. But here's the thing, it's usually Santa alone getting the praise on Christmas morning, and he should get his fair share of praise, but what about the ones who actually transport him? His reindeer. How are their bodies prepared to execute such a mammoth task? Well, I've done all the calculations and studying and slaving over these numbers, and I have figured it out. So in this video, we're going to do a flyover, pun intended, of the anatomy and physiology of these incredible creatures. How are their bodies adapted to get around the world all in one night? So stick around until the end because it is really vital that you know how to support these reindeers when you set out those milk and cookies in the evening before Santa comes rocking around your Christmas tree. Hey guys, organized biology here, where usually we are making difficult biology concepts simple, but today we've got ourselves a Christmas special, the anatomy and physiology of Santa's reindeer. We're going to be breaking down exactly how the physical bodies of the reindeer are adapted to do such an amazing task on Christmas Eve night. Let's do an overview of what we know. There are 2 billion children in the world, and assuming that there's about 2.5 kids per household, that is 800 million households necessary to stop at. Wow. This assumes, obviously, that every child has been tabbed as nice by Santa, and I know a few kids on my block that wouldn't pertain to, but we're gonna make that assumption that all these kids are going to get at least a present. Furthermore, they have only 32 hours starting in Kirimati, otherwise known as Christmas Island, learned that on the internet, and they're going to be moving west following that sunset until Christmas morning. That gives them about 12 hours of darkness approximately in every time zone, and that's going to add up to about 32 hours. Now, while this total distance is impossible to navigate, we're gonna assume it's about 100 million miles as we hop back and forth to households. So if you do the calculations, 800 million households in 32 hours, yeah, that puts their speed at about 2.7 million miles per hour. Approximated about 800 miles per second. And for those of you who use the metric system, don't be a Grinch. This creates a massive problem for a lot of reasons, but the first thing is that they have to stop and start at every single house in order to drop off the presents. This allots them about 1/10,000th of a second at every house. Additionally, they have to accelerate to 800 miles per second every 1/10,000th of a second. Hopefully I haven't lost you at this point because I've lost myself. That is a lot of acceleration and deceleration, and with that comes our friends, the G-forces. Think about this as like extra gravity. The faster you go, the stronger that gravitational acceleration is forced on you. You've likely felt this before, as you've probably done a roller coaster before if you're not a loser, and you felt that head rush that you feel as you go up. That is essentially a G-force. To compare, the average roller coaster exerts about 2 to 3 Gs on you, and space launch can launch you at about 4 to 5 Gs, okay? And at that point, most people actually begin to pass out. That's why if you see those videos of those people going up in space and they're just yeah, they're probably passed out. It's called syncope. And if you get above 6 Gs, you're likely going to die because all of that blood is also getting forced down by gravity. It pulls away from your brain doesn't get enough blood, and when your brain doesn't get enough blood, you die. Now let's compare to the reindeer, right? They're going from 0 miles per second to 800 miles per second every 1/10,000th of a second. That would exert a G-force on those reindeer of approximately 8.5 billion Gs. So to compare them to the weak humans, as we previously said, we'll pass out at about 4 to 5, we'll die at 6 to 10, reindeer experiencing 8.5 billion. So how do they do this? What physiological adaptations do they have to overcome these things? I'm glad you asked, person who didn't ask this question. So the first thing, as I mentioned, is the blood. The issue is the blood's getting pulled down from our brains down to our feet. So that's what causes us to either pass out or die. So the reindeer, and Santa we might add, has to have these shunts, right? So what shunts are is additional valves that will actually close up, basically disallowing that blood from going downward to the feet and instead staying in the brain. This is called vasoconstriction. So that being said, if they've got these extra valves, right, in order to withstand these types of forces and to keep about, say, 20% of their blood in their head, that's about 1,200 grams of blood, these valves would have to support approximately 25,000 pounds of force. Once again, for you kilogram people, that's about 11,000 kilograms. You're welcome, metric system. Now, while none of Santa's reindeer have ever been anatomically studied, and if you ever catch one, please let me know, it goes without saying that we would like to figure out how these valves exactly work. But we don't have enough time for that, so we're going to go into their heart. How do their hearts continuously pump that blood upward to their brains so that they can get that nutrient-rich blood to their brains as they're flying around the world super fast? Did some calculations, and to keep the blood moving through the reindeer at about, give or take, 3 meters a second, that's about exercise speed, the heart must expend approximately 51,000 joules of energy per beat. Now, on average, the human heart, as it beats, can produce about 2 joules of energy, and it gives about 70 milliliters of blood out every single time. You can see my cardiac output video if you need to. So therefore, the reindeer hearts are around 25,000 times stronger than our hearts. Because remember, we can only have about 2 joules per beat. They've got to have 51,000 joules per beat. It's either that or their heart actually beats 25,000 times faster than ours. That would be due to a hyperactive SA node. Let's move on to another idea of their bodies and how it works. Let's talk about blood pressure. We think that if their hearts are 25,000 times stronger than ours, it's likely that the blood pressure of reindeer is likely 25,000 times higher than ours, right? Because there's gonna be all that blood forced against those vessels in their bodies. So generally, we have, as a human, about 120/80 millimeters of mercury of blood pressure. Now, it can rise to about 200 millimeters of mercury during intense exercise, and so it's obvious that the reindeer will also experience that rise. Now, specifically, the reindeer's blood pressure, if we multiply that by approximately 25,000, we'd get to 4 million millimeters of mercury of systolic pressure, the top number. To put that in perspective, that equates to about 4 times the amount of pressure exerted at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean. With all that pressure, it's no wonder that they work just one day every year. They've got to rest the other 364. Now, of course, that would be made possible by their hyperelastic arteries that are really close to their heart, like the aorta, the left subclavian, as well as the common carotid, etc. So in that way, when the arteries expand, when the blood is forcing through it at, 4 million millimeters of mercury, it's allowed to stretch and then contract back so that the blood doesn't just blow up their arteries. Let's move on from heart and blood stuff, and let's talk about horsepower, or reindeer power, I should say. 2 billion children receiving presents, and each present weighing approximately, we'll just say 1 pound, in addition to the sleigh, reindeer, and Santa. That's a lot of weight to be moving 800 miles per second. So we'll just say it's just over 2 billion pounds that this sleigh actually weighs. So therefore, with the 9 reindeer pulling Santa's sleigh, each one would have to be generating approximately 112 quadrillion horsepower each. 112 quadrillion horsepower. To put that in perspective, rocket ships are measured to have about 40 million horsepower. So this would make the reindeer approximately 3 billion times more powerful than our spaceships. We're really using the wrong vehicle to get to space. Let's just go find Santa's reindeer for these things. So obviously, if they're going to generate this horsepower, those deer ate their Wheaties that morning. In fact, the caloric need per second of these reindeer would be approximately 20 quadrillion calories. Now multiply that times 130,000 seconds in 36 hours, and there is a massive energy need. It's 2.6, and then multiply that by 10 with 22 zeros after it. That's a big number. So here's where you come in. It is imperative that we as a society set out the right types of food for these reindeer. Carrots and celery will not cut it. They're too low in calories. So if we have 800 million households, we have to get this right. Each household, therefore, must put out approximately 3.25 times 10 to the 12th calories worth of food to keep the reindeer going during this brutal night. And this is where we can decide, hey, how are we gonna do this? How are we gonna help these reindeer out? So we're gonna go with either corn or oats. They're generally high calories for low cost. So I'm trying to be cost effective for you as you get prepared for this evening. So if you want to go with oats and feed these reindeer some oats on Christmas Eve night, you get about 300 calories per cup of oats. So each family has to set out about 10.8 billion cups of oats. At 1 cent per cup, that would only set you back about $108 million. I don't know what that is in pounds for you British people, but it's still a lot. So let's say we don't want to do oats. Maybe that's a little steep. So let's talk about corn instead. At about 125 calories per cup of corn, each family would only have to set out about 26 billion cups of corn. And at 25 cents per cup, that will only set you back around $6.5 billion. So in my opinion, oats are probably the way to go. Now let's move on from the calories. Let's talk about the muscles of these buff reindeer. So these reindeer likely don't skip leg day. In order to thrust out a power output of about 112 quadrillion horsepower, their skeletal muscles must be hyper adapted. In humans, we can generate about 50 watts with 2 to 3 pounds of muscle, and that's about 1/10 of a horsepower. Therefore, in order to generate the type of horsepower we're talking about, they have to have about 1.67 times 10 to the 18th kilograms of muscle tissue packed into their tiny little bodies. That's a lot of mass. I mean, we're talking about 1/1000th the mass of the moon packed into a tiny little reindeer body. Now, while the reindeer are very heavy, it's actually healthy weight, right? It is muscle mass that goes to show that BMI calculators are trash. Now, obviously, the reindeer are weightless, right? They're magical creatures, but let's hypothetically say how heavy they'd be if they actually had a weight. That would be about 3.682 quintillion pounds. Clearly, we're working with some buff reindeer that you don't want to pick a fight with. Now, what physiological adaptations are inside that dense pack of muscle? Well, likely the myosin heads in their skeletal muscle that grab the action to allow those muscles to contract are likely super dense and super strong, likely stronger than any human myosin head would be. So if you want to learn about how your puny little muscles work, you can watch this video here. Now, last but not least, let's talk about heat homeostasis. Obviously, our body temperatures are resting around 98 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius, and reindeer are about the same at about 102 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take 39, 40 degrees Celsius. But with all this energy expenditure that they're doing, coupled with the compressive heat energy being created by moving to 800 miles per second, they're going to need some help to cool off. Now, of course, they're going to be flying at about, 30,000 foot altitude, which is going to be an air temperature of around -40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is cold, but they're still going to need help getting cooler than that. So let's think about the human body. We have two main mechanisms to cool ourselves off. Number one, obviously, as you can maybe tell on the beads of sweat on my forehead, we begin to sweat when we are warm. The second thing we do is we have what's called peripheral vasodilation, where our blood vessels are going to open up wide, allow that heat to escape from the blood into the air, thus cooling ourselves off. And lastly, we don't have much hair, so obviously when we sweat, it's going to allow that heat to escape faster. But our reindeer friends do have a lot of hair. It's probably in Santa's best interest to shear them all off just before Christmas Eve night. I wonder what he does with all that reindeer hair. Maybe makes a coat? Now, besides shearing the reindeer, the problem becomes they don't have sweat glands. Just like dogs, they have to actually lose their heat through panting, right? And a dog will normally pant about 4 times a second during exercise. We can assume that the reindeer are panting millions of times per second, allowing that heat to escape out through their mouths. They must have a super hyper-speed breathing reflex. The humans also have, which you can learn about here. This is how we control our breathing. And it's going to be super sped up in reindeer so that they can lose all of that heat. And lastly, about that vasodilation, right? Opening up the blood vessels to let more heat out. It's likely that these reindeer have an incredible ability to do just that. So the smooth muscle wrapped around those blood vessels in the skin will relax, thus opening those blood vessels to a very large diameter so that heat can escape from the reindeer body. Now, what's interesting is when humans do that, when we're warm, we appear very red. So we can assume that the reindeer will also appear red as that blood comes to the surface of the skin. But apparently not all reindeer are made the same. It seems that one such reindeer, Rudolph, likely does that a little more in his nose than throughout the rest of his body, which is why he wasn't invited to those reindeer games.